Hello, I'm Tony Svejcar with the Agricultural Research Service and the Eastern Oregon Agricultural Research Center, and I'm here to present an Eastern Oregon Ag Minute. This week I'm going to spend talking about the agricultural economy, starting at the national level and working my way to Harney County. Overall, the U.S. has run a trade deficit for more than 20 years, but the U.S. has been a net exporter of agricultural products since 1959. In the general scheme of things, agriculture has been one of the few bright spots. However, our trade surplus in agriculture has declined from $27.3 billion in 1996 to $10.5 billion in 2003. Our ag exports continue to rise, but imports are rising faster. Some of this has to do with the very strong dollar during the late 1990s and early part of this decade. Imports became cheaper and exports more expensive. During the last several years, the value of the dollar has declined, and it will be interesting to see how that influences trade during the next several years. So what are we importing? A large part of the increased imports have been horticultural products, with almost half coming from Mexico and Latin America. Now, I think the world trade of agricultural products is likely to change dramatically over the next 20 years. China and Brazil are two countries that could have a major impact on agricultural markets. Tomorrow I'll talk about production of agricultural commodities important to our region of the country. Two commodities dominate the agricultural economy of Harney County: beef cattle and hay. I'll talk more about Harney County later, but for the moment I want to focus on the rankings of states for cash receipts for these two ag commodities. Beef cattle are the #1 ag commodity in the U.S. when ranked by cash receipts. The top producing states in order are Texas, Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, Iowa, South Dakota, California, Missouri, and Montana. Oregon ranks about 20th depending on the year. Hay is the #11 commodity in the U.S. when ranked by cash receipt. The leading states are California, Idaho, Texas, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, New Mexico, Kansas, Pennsylvania, and Missouri. Hay is actually a much bigger commodity than one might think looking at cash sales. Many dairy producers in the Midwest grow their own hay and feed it to their own livestock. So the numbers do not show up in cash sales. Instead, they show up in sale of milk and calves. In terms of acres planted, corn is #1, soybeans #2, and hay a close third. Tomorrow I'll talk about agricultural production in Oregon. There has been a steady increase in net farm income for Oregon during the past 4 years. During 2003, gross farm income in Oregon was $4.1 billion. That's billion with a B. Oregon has a very diversified farm economy and ranks first or second in the nation in production of many specialty crops. For example, we are first in production of blackberries, boysenberries, loganberries, 4 types of grass seed, hazelnuts, Christmas trees, and potted florist azaleas. We're #2 in peppermint, hops, spearmint, snap beans for processing, storage onions, and Dungeness crab. There probably isn't a whole lot of competition in that last category. Keep in mind that overall production of many of these crops is low. It's just that Oregon produces more than other states. If we rank the top agricultural commodities in the state by cash receipts, greenhouse and nursery crops are #1, beef cattle #2, milk is 3rd, and hay #4. Today I'll provide some information on the agricultural economy of Harney County. During 2003, gross farm and ranch sales for Harney County were $57.6 million. The breakdown is about $15 million in crops, mostly alfalfa hay, and about $42 million in animal products, mostly beef cattle. If we go back to 1995, the gross sales were about $29 million. So, from 1995 to 2003, gross farm sales in Harney County have nearly doubled. This is very fortunate given the problems with some of the other areas of the local economy. How do we compare to other counties in the state? In terms of number of beef cattle, Harney County is #2 after Malheur County. And in terms of total tons of hay produced, Harney County is 5th after Lake, Klamath, Malheur, and Umatilla counties. It would be nice to see a little more diversification in the agricultural economy of our county, but given the climate, there are some obvious limits. I want to spend today talking about the cost of food to the U.S. consumer. U.S. agricultural policy has focused on maintaining a cheap, abundant food supply since the Great Depression of the 1930s. I think the folks that endured the Great Depression did not want to see the country face food shortages again. In 1933, food cost 25% of disposable income in the U.S. That number did not drop below 20% until 1953, and for the past 6 or 7 years, we've paid about 10% of our disposable income for food. That compares to 20 to 25% in Europe and about 50% in many third world countries. What does a cheap food policy mean to each of us? The countrywide average for disposable income is around $25,000. If we use this figure, the annual cost of food at 10% would be $2,500 per year. At 25%, it would be $6,250 per year. So if food costs here were comparable to those in Europe, we would all pay an average of about $3,500 per year more for food. The future of farm policy is currently under debate. There are certainly ways to improve our policies, and we see increasing emphasis on conservation practices and food safety. But we should all appreciate the variety, safety, and relative low cost of the foods we buy. I'm Tony Svejcar. Thanks for listening.